Let's now finally go back to coding. And so in this lecture and the next one, we're going to build a beautiful accordion component. And it's going to be based on this accordion example that we saw in the last lecture. So we're going to build something very similar, which will look like this one on the right side. So let's go do that. And as always, when we start a new section, we need our starter files. So here in starter, now we need folder number 6. And so actually, this is only 2 images, but well, we will need it. All right. So folder number 6. Here, let's create a new window. And another trick would actually to be simply dragging this folder here onto that icon. So you can do that. So like this, it will then open up a new window already with that folder selected. Or of course, you can also just create a new window and then open the project folder from there. So like we have been doing up until this point. So both way works, and I actually prefer the first one that I showed you. And so now let's start by creating an HTML file right here. And we're going to create 6 components in this section. And so I'm not going to call them index.html, but instead I'm calling this one 01 accordion like this .html. All right. And since we are having so many files, I will actually keep each of these components here self-contained inside of each HTML file. So what that means is that I will not create an external CSS file for each of them, but instead we will simply use the style tag right here. So to create the HTML, we have been always using it manually, but now let's actually have VS Code generated for us. So exclamation mark, tab, and there we go. So now the first thing is to change this to accordion component. And then remember, we can simply declare or write the style tag in here. So that will then create a style element in which we can style our page. All right. Now I will actually use a similar visual style than the project that we created in the last section. So therefore, what I'm going to do now is to open the CSS file of that one in order to copy some very simple styles. So let's go here to the open menu, and then on the desktop we have the previous section, and then actually I need the HTML as well so that I can grab this link here for the inter font. So please go ahead and do the same thing now. So copy this link element here, which will include the inter typeface, so font. So that is done. And now in the CSS, we can get some of this stuff. So our spacing system, these colors, the universal selector, this reset, so we don't have to write it all over again, because by now you already know how it works. And then here this body element as well. So let's take that. And so with this, we saved ourselves some time. This here we might actually not, well, actually let's leave it there. And then here I'm indenting this a little bit to make it look better. Let's get rid of some spaces and of this comment as well. And here actually we don't want that border in this body. All right. And now let's create a simple div element here with the class of accordion. And now I will just write something here. Let's say test. Okay. And so now we have something very basic set up. So we have some very simple styles for the body. And so let's test that by clicking here on Go Live. So there we have our page with the live connection. And if for some reason that didn't work on your computer, you can simply also open the HTML file directly. All right. But so this did work. And so let's start by actually defining a width for this accordion element. So our entire component will basically be this right here. So let's select this element based on this class, and I will give it a fixed width of 700 pixels, and I also want to center it. And remember, for that we can use the trick of setting the left and right margins to auto and the top and bottom to something else. So let's say top and bottom 100 pixels, and then again left and right we set them to auto. And that will automatically center this element inside of its parent. So in this case, that is the body. Just to see that, let's give it some background color. And, well, any color works. All right. Nice. All right. Nice. So let's actually turn that off again. And now we can start filling up our HTML here a little bit. And for that, let's actually take a look at what we have here. So basically the final result, which is this. So you see that basically this accordion has 3 elements. So this first one and the third one are closed right now, and the open one looks like this. Now, of course, we will not be able to add the functionality here. So when we click here somewhere, of course, this box does not open. So for that, we would need JavaScript, but of course, that's not what we're going to do here in this section. But anyway, to get started, we will actually only build this element right here. So basically only the open state like this. So here we have a number, then we have this title here, so some kind of text, then this icon pointing downwards, and then here we have a box in there. So this box here contains this text and then this list. And so basically it is this box with this content here that is hidden right here and right here. All right. So later we will then hide basically this content here, or actually here, and we will leave it visible right here in this box. Okay. So the plan is to now create these 4 elements. So this number, this text, this icon, and then a box with this paragraph and this unordered list. All right. And then after that, we will style them, and only then in the end, we will care about the layout. So the first thing is this number, and I'm simply going to use a generic paragraph element here for all this text. So that's 0 to, and of course it needs some kind of class as well. So number, then another p element with the class of text. So let me just copy what I have there. So how long do I have to return my chair? All right. Then we have that icon. And for that, let's actually use the hero icons again. So heroicons.com, I think. Okay. And now let's just search for that one. Yeah, so it's the chevron down. So copy SVG, and let's paste that here as the third child element. Give it a save, and well, it's already here in our page. Let's give it a better class name. Let's just say icon. And then finally, we need this hidden box here. So let's actually call that a hidden box. So since it is a box, I will simply use the generic div element. So this one doesn't need any semantic meaning, and so a div is just fine. So hidden box. And inside of that, there is some kind of paragraph. And well, this one maybe doesn't need a class. Let's just leave it like this. And here we need some blind text. So I'm not going to copy that text, of course, because remember that in VS Code, we can write lorem like this, And then that will generate a bunch of blind text for us. So just like this. Let's see. Now, that looks kind of like the same amount of text, but if it's too much, we can just cut it a bit later. And so now let's create that unordered list. And remember, it is unordered because these here are simple bullet points. And so in there, each of them is a list item. And now let's here again use lorem. And I will now cut this part here and put that into the next one. So paste that here now. And now we'll do the same again, because that content, of course, is a bit too long. Okay, and maybe let's leave that. And so your content is going to look a little bit different than mine now, but that's not really a problem because this is always random. Okay, so that looks good for now as far as the HTML goes. Oh, actually, we should wrap all of this content here inside yet another one. So right now, inside of the accordion, we have number, text, and so on and so forth. However, what we actually want in the accordion is these three elements. So these three items, basically. So this first, the second, and the third item, of course, are individual elements. So elements inside of the accordion. But we right here have these elements as direct children, and so that's not correct. So let's simply create another div called an item. But this we don't want here. We want it at the very end. All right. So that's better. And now let's style all of this. And now it's time to use again that trick that I showed you before. So remember, for that, we just select something. Then we can hit Option or Alt on our keyboard. And then if I double click here again, it will select the next class. And so like this, we don't have to copy paste them multiple times. We can just do it all at once. So again, I'm now hitting the Option or Alt key, double click on this class, then on this class, and finally this one here. All right, now I copy it, and here inside of my style, I can now paste that. And so now I can do this here a lot easier. Okay, so almost done. Because this is always like a lot of work selecting all of these elements in the very beginning. But now we're done with that, and so let's style them one by one. And I'm going to start basically with the visual styles. So of the number, the text, and this icon here. And let's start with the icon actually, because it is taking up a lot of space. So let's make it really small. So remember that these icons were designed for 24 pixels. And so I'm actually respecting that size. And now the color, remember, we can manipulate it using the stroke property. And we have our color value up here. Okay, and that looks a lot better already. Okay, let's take a look at our original here. And so next up, let's style the number and the text. And let's use the font size of 24 pixels here. So number, font size 24 pixels. And let's also make it a bit bolder, because this is an important piece of content. And so we make it bold in order to give it some more emphasis. Oh, and also the text color, let's make it green at this point, even though a bit later we will actually make this in a different way. So let's copy these, or actually, if it's exactly the same style as the text here, let us put the selector here as the second one in this list. So remember, as we learned way back, we can basically create a list of selectors, And so now this declaration block here will apply to this one and to this one, right? Give it a save. Now we cannot see it, but there you go. Great. Now, next up, let's style this text here and this unordered list. All right, and I didn't give them a class, so let's just say hidden box and then select the P as a child there. And here, all I want to do is to improve the line height and set it to 1.6 and also give it some margin to the bottom. So let's say 24 pixels. Okay, so that looks better. And now finally also the UL. Okay, so we want to set a lighter text here on these. And so in order to do that, we don't have to select each of them, but instead we can simply set that color on the parent, and then that will move down. And so that will then be inherited. Now, about that lighter color, this one here, let me actually get that from the open color again. Open colors. So that is this one. And let's use this one here, let's say. All right. Well, that's a little bit too much on the light side. So let's go with this one. Yeah, that looks better. Maybe it is not really the best choice here in terms of accessibility, but well, let's just leave it as this for now. We're going to worry about that in some other project. So in the next section, actually. Now here we need to then also set some margin on the left. So basically in order to align this a little bit, so the bullet points with the P, with the paragraph. So margin left and now 16 pixels. That might work. That looks aligned. Well, maybe it needs to be a little bit more. Yeah, that's correct. So here we broke a little bit our system. But in this case, it was necessary because only with that value, it's now perfectly aligned. And actually not yet, I think. Now it's perfect. All right. Now next, we want to create some space here between these items. And so now it's time that I will finally show you something new in CSS, and in particular in Flexbox. Now you might be wondering, why is he going to use Flexbox? I mean, we don't really want these elements side by side, right? And that is totally correct. However, we can still use Flexbox by doing something new, which I hinted at when we first learned Flexbox, but we never did it. So let me start by explaining why I would use Flexbox for something like this, and then also how. So in order to create the space between these elements here, I would now have to select all of them and then add a margin to the bottom to all of them except for the last one. So again, I would have to select them now. I can actually do that very quickly. Margin bottom of 12 pixels, like this. And then I would also have to select the last one and set it back to 0. Right? However, we can have all of this in a much easier way, which is by using Flexbox and then setting the gap property. However, that gap is usually horizontally. And also, if we set something to Flexbox, it will put the elements side by side, right? However, there is a really nice and very important trick, which is that we can set the flex direction of the container to column. So let's remove all of this here. All right. And then right here, let's set this to a flex container. So display flex. And so by default, again, the elements will be set side by side like this, right? But as I mentioned, we can now say flex direction and set it to column. So by default it is row, and now if we set column, it will simply look exactly like before. All right. However, if we now define the gap property, so gap, let's say 12 pixels, then see what happens. So you see that now the gap property basically was applied vertically. So between these elements like this, and no longer horizontally, right? So that is the power of flex direction. And let's actually take a look at a graphical explanation to make really sure that you understand this very important concept. Now here as an example, I'm actually using the accordion element, but of course that's not important. The principle is exactly the same. So anyway, right here we can see what Flexbox is by default. So the main axis is basically horizontally and the elements are side by side right now because we have display set to flex and we also have some gap there of 24 pixels. And so that's why there is some space horizontally between the items. However, if we now set flex direction to column, then what happens? So you see that now basically the elements are stacked one after the other because the main axis rotated by 90 degrees. And so now the main axis no longer goes from left to right, but from top to bottom. Or in other words, the main axis is now vertically and no longer horizontally. On the other hand, the cross axis, which used to be vertically, is now horizontally. And so now everything is different. Everything in Flexbox has now turned by 90 degrees, basically. So what this means is that now align items no longer aligns the items vertically, but horizontally. And in the same sense, justify content now no longer aligns the items horizontally, but vertically. And finally, of course, as we already saw in practice, the gap property now acts like margin bottom and no longer like margin right. Okay? So this is really important for you to understand, as this feature is actually one of the main features of Flexbox. It gives Flexbox even more power than we already thought that it had. All right? So I hope that this made sense. And so let's now go back to our code. And to see this explanation basically again, let's inspect that here. So right here, we now see the gap there between the elements, right? And we can even turn this on and then it stays permanently just like in CSS Grid. And of course, if we took out the flex direction to column, then they would be side by side and this space here would be horizontally, right? Now let's also just try to use align items here, because as you saw, this now should work differently. So remember that usually align items would align our flex items vertically, right? But what do you expect will happen now as we center them? Well, you see, now they got aligned horizontally. So again, if we turned flex direction off here, then you see that the alignment would be vertically, right? So this one is taller and these are a bit smaller, and we see that they are vertically aligned. But by turning this on, then everything rotates 90 degrees basically, and now the alignment is horizontally. So you see that all of them here are like basically centered. So along the cross axis, which now is going from left to right. So here where I'm moving my mouse, right? So now of course we don't want that here in this example, but this was just to demonstrate how the cross and the main axis did actually rotate. And actually I think this is too much space, and that is because I did not reset the line height. So many times what I do is to set the line height here on the body to 1, and so basically resetting it. So since this is about text, this property, it will get inherited. And so we can put it in a body. And so now the space that we had, or some of it, is gone. And it looks better like this. All right, so we have some decent visual styling going on here. And so for now in this lecture, that's it. And so in the next one, we will take care of finally building the layout and then also add the 2 other elements to our accordion. So take a small break and then I see you back here.